Hello. All these Brexit divisions in the United Kingdom these days has left me thinking about another divisive period in our history, albeit far bloodier, the Wars of the Three Kingdoms. Sometimes referred to as the English Civil Wars, but actually expanded beyond that. So the Wars of the Three Kingdoms is a perhaps more fitting name for the whole conflict. But I've just been watching To Kill a King, and I want to do a film review here. To Kill a King. So this is a film by Mike Barker, 2003, distributed by Film 4. It's a film I've watched several times, and it's a powerful film. But one thing I find striking is, for such an important period of our history, the English Civil Wars, the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, there is a scant amount of feature films on that subject. The only three that I can think of is this, which technically takes place after the conflict. Cromwell, 1970, which was critically acclaimed, but I haven't seen it yet. And A Field in England, which was a very unusual film. Again, I haven't seen it, but it was focusing on very psychological, very unusual film, black and white, focusing on a group of cavaliers trying to find gold in a field and psychedelic effects of mushrooms. It's definitely a film I want to see. But, considering the importance of the events of the 1640s, it is incredible that there isn't more feature films. Really is. But if you do want a sort of introduction to that period, I think this is as good as any. To Kill a King. So basically this focuses on primarily the relationship between Oliver Cromwell and Sir Thomas Fairfax. As you can see there, four main characters. Oliver Cromwell, played by Tim Roth. Sir Thomas Fairfax, played by Dougray Scott. Lady Anne Fairfax is played by Olivia Williams, and King Charles I by Rupert Everett. Strong performances all around. But the film particularly focuses on the relationship between Cromwell and Fairfax, a complex relationship, very important relationship. Fairfax was one of the most skilled military commanders, I think it's fair to say, in British history. And people actually forget that Cromwell was second in command in the new model army to Sir Thomas Fairfax. It wasn't the other way around, although of course it was Cromwell that ended up being Lord Protector. So the film focuses immediately in the post-war years leading up to the trial and execution of King Charles I, and also the role of Denzil Holles, who was an important parliamentarian, and what the Cromwell faction considered to be treason. I think what the film shows is a slightly fanatical Cromwell. Now, I like Tim Roth as an actor. I think he's a good actor. But the Cromwell in this film is very much, I guess you would say, the Cromwell of reputation, the tyrannical Cromwell. He's seen as a bit of a loose cannon, a bit of a borderline, maybe sadist is the wrong word, but certainly very quick to engage in extrajudicial execution. For example, there's a scene near the start. The opening of the film starts off with the aftermath of the Battle of Naseby and all the blood and gore from that. But it shows a man trying to kill Cromwell, and Fairfax saves Cromwell. Cromwell wants to just kill the man in cold blood rather than putting him on trial. And this is also seen during an assassination attempt of Cromwell as he's becoming Lord Protector, when it implies that Fairfax was behind a plot against Cromwell. I need to check into the historical authenticity of this, but it shows Cromwell isn't just content with the man being sent to the Tower of London. He wants him burned in public at Tyburn. So Cromwell definitely had a tyrannical streak. I thought Rupert Everett was very important, or very, very strong portrayal of Charles I. Stubborn, all the elegance of royalty that you would expect, but a very stubborn man as well. And Lady Anne Fairfax is a lot more than just a love interest. Anne Fairfax actually came from a pro-royalist family. So although Fairfax was a gentleman and Lord of the Realm. He was obviously pro-parliamentarian, and he is one of the most interesting figures of that period. Whilst Cromwell has sealed his place in history as one of the most important figures in British history, I think Fairfax is a lot more than a footnote. I mean, Fairfax was a lot more personally popular than Cromwell, and the film shows that. It shows, for example, after this incident where Cromwell's almost assassinated and the two men are falling out, Fairfax obviously doesn't want the man to be blamed for him being behind the plot, so he just admits it to Cromwell. Cromwell kind of has a rant, burn the traitor, and the men just don't want to do it. Such was the popularity of Fairfax, and he goes out to applause. Fairfax was genuinely popular, and he never wanted the king to die. The depiction of Charles's execution, I watched actually the segment from Cromwell just for comparison. Both films depict it in the dramatic way it should be portrayed. I mean, this was unparalleled, the regicide, occurring 130 years before the regicide in France. Very, very important event in our history. And Rupert Everett portrayed it very accurately. Charles was actually executed on a January day. It was freezing, and it said that he wore extra shirts so as to not appear to be shivering. He, the screenplay in the film basically recites word for word as historical oral tradition has it. I go from a corruptible to an incorruptible crown. I will say no more. And there's a sort of dramatic bit where it shows a little girl getting under the scaffold, and it doesn't really spare detail. It shows the axe coming down, and the gasp from the crowd, which is historically authentic, and the little girl getting sprayed by blood. It's a bit gory, but I guess that's to show the drama of the event, and it shows Charles as he's walking up to the scaffold, people touching his feet. Bear in mind, this was a period when people really did believe in the divine right of kings, and Charles was convinced he was right. He was convinced he was God on earth. And it shows one of the crowd, a man shouting that out. It does show Cromwell putting his hand in the king's blood and saying, "Look, it's red like ours." That may be a bit of artistic license. Certainly Cromwell was there at the execution, which took place in Whitehall, outside the banqueting hall. Most executions, important executions, took place at Tower Hill, Tower Green, but in the case of Charles, it was at Whitehall outside the banqueting house, some of which can still be seen. But I think it's, all in all, it's a good film. It's I think it's powerful performances. Cromwell, like I say, is sort of, the screenplay sort of lends him into a bit of the villainous character that we know Cromwell from history. The reality perhaps is Cromwell's a lot more complex than that. I think that he's one of those characters that will always generate controversy and divisive views. One of the most important figures in British history. He doesn't come across as very likeable from the film. No disrespect to Tim Roth. Tim Roth is a fine actor, but he comes across as quite a cold, callous individual. Whereas Sir Thomas Fairfax comes across as a more compassionate man, more level-headed. Rupert Everett's portrayal of the king portrays him as quite arrogant and stubborn and basically in denial. And Lady Anne Fairfax shows that she still has royalist sympathies. There's one bit where she very bravely goes right through Parliament, a place where women aren't meant to be, and bows to the king as a sort of open defiance against Cromwell. It's quite brave on her part. And I think this is meant to allude to the fact that she supposedly shouted out protests during the trial of the king. So although her husband was fighting for the parliamentarian cause, she came from a royalist family, and Fairfax never wanted the king to be executed. So the film focuses a lot on constitutional issues. I mean, there's no focus on battles. It's not technically a war film. The only scene you see with real warfare is the first sort of few minutes where you see the aftermath of the Battle of Naseby, which was one of the bloodiest battles of the wars. But it is a good introduction to that period. I just think that there should be a lot more films covered about that time, especially now that we're looking at Brexit. I really think this is a period of our history that is overlooked. I think too much of our history in our curriculum focuses on the Tudors and the Nazis, World War II. As important as both those periods certainly are, I mean, the Wars of the Three Kingdoms really were the formation of modern Britain. I would say the Wars of the Three Kingdoms and the Act of Union, the Great Reform Act of 1832, are two events that are greatly overlooked, and they're very important. And I would say also the formation of the Acts of Union, 1707 and 1800, very overlooked. Check it out, To Kill a King, directed by Mike Barker, 2003. My only critique of the film is it has that slightly irritating film 4 thing. BBC films sometimes do this as well, where the camera angle is a little bit kind of frantic, and it's kind of seen as a quirky thing. I'm not too fussed on that. You know, it's kind of, when you get a dramatic scene, it's filmed in a certain way. It's hard to explain, but it's a little bit distracting, and that's something that film 4 and BBC films tend to do. Other than that though, strong performances. Check it out. To Kill a King, 2003, directed by Mike Barker, starring Tim Roth, Douglas Scott, Olivia Williams and Rupert Everett.